Write your name and class code with Sharpie on the tape that keeps your warp strings in place. Pinch the yarn together carefully, pull all of the yarn strands through the eye of the needle, form a loop with the yarn, and tuck the tail into the loophole. Pull tight. Near the bottom of the loom, begin weaving. The needle will lead your yarn in a pattern over, under each warp thread. Continue this pattern over, under, all the way across your row. You may pull the needle out from underneath the thread, but be sure to pick up the pattern where you left off. Next, feed the yarn through the strings, leaving a long enough tail to tie off later. It's very tempting to go under again and do the under-over pattern. You have to do the opposite of what you did the last row. Here the last thing I did was go under, then I need to begin by going over. Then I will repeat over, under across all of the warp strings on my loom. Once you have completed the second row, feed the yarn through the strings until the yarn loop is gone. Be sure to keep the yarn loose. Do not pull it tight. When you start your third row, be sure to do the opposite of the last thing you did. Last thing I did was go over, so I must start under. Then you will go over, under all the way across the loom and complete your third row. After each row, slide the yarn down to meet up with the other yarn. Remember, keep the yarn loose on the ends. You do not want to pull it tight like this. You need to keep it loose. If you tighten it, it will begin to look like an hourglass shape instead of looking like a rectangle. After my fourth row, there's not enough yarn to make another row, so I will stop using yellow yarn and show you how to switch colors. First, you need to remove the yellow yarn from the needle. After you've untied the needle, you can get your next color and thread it onto the needle. Remember, you should make a loop and tuck the tail through the loop and pull it tight. Okay, now I'm going to begin weaving right where I left off. So here's where I left off. I went over last, so I will go under first. Always remember to keep a long enough tail when you start a new color to tie it to the color next to it. The thickness of the yarn will determine how quickly it will fill the space up. Fluffy yarn will fill the space quickly. Thin yarn makes a tighter weave and fills a smaller amount of space. As you weave, you can begin to tie the tails together. I call these strings the fringe. Here I'm grabbing two tails that are next to each other, overlapping and pulling one string underneath through the loop. This is a double knot. It's simply two knots on top of each other, just like you tie your shoes, but without a bow. Make sure you tie all the strings together. The strings on the end in the beginning don't really have friends, so you could tie them to the closest string next to it. You could also tie the strings as you go. Here's what that would look like. I'm leaving a short tail here for you to see how difficult it is to tie a knot with a small string. So I'm doing the tiny loop, pulling my string through, and trying to get another loop. That's why I want you to leave about 2 inches worth of tail at the end of each color to make it easier for you to tie off your ends. You can see that my speckled cream yarn is kind of at an angle. The reason why is because the yarn was thick and thin. Now I'm going to show you some mistakes. Can you see where I made a mistake? The white warp string should be alternating from one row to the next, but there are some areas where I could see the white string is going over 2 rows, which means somewhere I skipped an under-over pattern. So here's how to fix that mistake. You have to go back through your weaving and undo everything. That might mean a lot of work to redo what you feel like you spend a lot of time doing. I know this can be frustrating. That's why I want you to try to do it right the first time. I understand we all make mistakes, so do your best and everything's going to work out. Now that I'm back to a good spot on my weaving, I can make sure that I keep the pattern and I do under over and don't miss any strings. When I get to the end of each row, I can double check and make sure I didn't miss any strings or have the teacher check. Here I'm purposefully missing the last string in the weaving. So at the very end, there's 2 overs and there should be an over under. So when I start the next row, and if I were to just weave randomly, this is not good technique. You need to make sure that you're being purposeful to keep the pattern. See how the white thread is going over 2 rows of yarn? That's a good indicator that something went wrong and I need to fix it. So the best thing to do is to undo what you started and redo it the correct way. You have to stay focused when you're weaving. If you do not focus, then you might make crucial mistakes. So here's one mistake. If you start at the same place you left off and put it underneath the warp threads, you can see that it pulls right back out. It's because the yarn isn't locked into place. So you need to make sure you do the opposite thing so that when you tighten it, it does not pull the yarn all the way back out of your weaving. Another problem you might encounter is choppy thread. Sometimes when people cut the yarn, they just chomp on it like an alligator mouth and the thread doesn't cut all the way through. So you got to make sure you have sharp scissors and don't leave choppy yarn for somebody else to have a horrible mistake. Tiny scraps go in the trash, but big strings go back in the yarn basket. Remember, you can do hard things, and anything is possible. So try your best and put your art skills to the test.